morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for this session. We are waiting for a couple of more people to join us from previous panels, so bear with us as they trickle in. My name is Vanja Škorić. I'm a program director at the European Center for Not-for-Profit Law, a civil society organization based in the Netherlands, with over 20 years of work on protection of civic freedoms and civil society. I'm very grateful to my colleague Karolina Iwanska for preparing and organizing this session. Unfortunately, she's not able to join us, but hopefully we can send her some energy and photos from this session. We are also an EDRi member and co-organizer of this wonderful summit. It is my pleasure to welcome to this roundtable all of you and our distinguished panelists and scene setters, where we will zoom into how has civil society engaged and how can it engage better in European policy making. With recently adopted digital frameworks, civil society has really proved a crucial partner in providing input, in providing our expertise, in providing different evidence, in contributing the unique perspectives. This has not always been easy, although we have been very constructive in proposing concrete legal and policy initiatives and solutions. However, this sometimes was recognized and even facilitated by the European institutions, and we sincerely thank them for this effort. On the other side, the very complex nature of the EU legislative and enforcement process, as we all know, is providing a very difficult situation for most of the civil society who wishes to participate. It's very difficult to break through the silos, through the opaque processes, through the industry voices. It's absolutely almost impossible for organizations that are working directly with people who are at harm from digital effects to actually contribute meaningfully, especially those who are outside of the Brussels bubble. This also contributes to the EU's democracy deficit that is worrying the institutions in particular. So today we wish to encourage a very safe and open space to share, to learn, and to be constructive, to see some of the lessons from the past engagements with the institutions, to recognize the constraints of the institutions, but also to understand the treaty obligations for fostering and facilitating civic dialogue and participation, to see how we can use these lessons for better, more inclusive, more effective efforts of engagement going forward. I am very happy to be joined today with wonderful people sitting on this panel. There are 3 representatives of the institutions and 3 representatives from the civil society. I will introduce them now. Special thanks to the MEP Marina Kaljurand, she, her, the vice chair of the LIBE committee from S&D Group for joining us. Thank you for being here. Rita Wezenbeek, she, her, director of platforms policy and enforcement from DG Connect, European Commission, very busy with panels today, I know. So thank you for taking effort to be here. Irina Orsic, she, her, the head of the sector AI Act and Governance and Compliance at the AI Office from the Commission. Thank you for joining us. Asha Allen, she, her, Secretary General from the Center for Democracy and Technology. Katarzyna Szymlewicz, she, her, President of Panoptykon Foundation from Poland. And Alexander Biard, he, him, the head of the Enforcement and Redress from BEUC. A quick note on the format. After very brief, maximum 6 minutes per person, introductory remarks from our distinguished panel, we will open the discussion for all of you among speakers. Again, we want to encourage you to really feel safe, share, learn, and be constructive. So please keep your questions, comments, and interventions, observations ready. We would like to start with MEP Kaljurand and the legislative process. we know it's extremely complicated for outsiders, probably also for some insiders as well. You will tell us. As a very experienced legislator, what would be your lesson learned? Some positive examples of how you engaged, or you or your colleagues, how you engaged civil society within the processes, and what would make that process even more accessible and sustainable for the future? Please take the floor.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction, and it's a real pleasure to be here. It's the second day in a row I'm speaking about civil society and different stakeholders, so Olaf, I apologize if you have to listen to that once again. I came from The Hague, where yesterday there was the celebration of the 125th anniversary of peace process, now with emphasis on all the digital topics. I love civil society. It's an honest assessment. And it's an honest assessment, I think, coming very much from my background. I come from Estonia. 2007, when there were first cyber attacks by a sovereign country on another sovereign country, I was Estonian ambassador to Russia, which means that literally in 30 minutes I had to learn what does tech mean, what do DDoS attacks mean, and coming from Estonia, we started immediately cooperating with other stakeholders. My background is in government. And as I always say, it's not in the DNA of government to cooperate with other stakeholders. For centuries, governments were the ones who had the right solutions. Governments were the ones who knew how the world should be and how we should act in the world. So to change the thinking, it's not easy. And I would argue it has not completely changed, not in all institutions, not in all countries, not with all people. You need some experience. And my experience comes exactly with cooperating with different stakeholders during the crisis, but during the peacetime. And when I say different stakeholders, today we're talking about civil society, but I would emphasize the need to cooperate with private sector, with industry, with academia, with all the stakeholders to get the best result. I think the second thing that has changed my position is my political affiliation. I'm a social democrat, yeah? And somehow, by definition, it's easier for social democrats to cooperate with civil society than maybe for some other political parties or political affiliations. This is my second term in the European Parliament. The first thing I started to work on when I was elected to the European Parliament in 2019 was terrorist content online. I don't know if you guys remember that. And there was huge assistance from the civil society.
In what way?
Information, good references, lessons learned, because sitting in the European Parliament with excellent staff, and Lina is one of my excellent staff, you do not have time to go through all the details. That means that we need your assistance, but it has to be put on the table in a clever way. So sometimes I prefer meetings. And I think that, for example, when shadows invite representatives of civil society to the shadows meetings, extremely useful. Because then you can listen to the civil society position, and you have the Commission, you have Council, you have others, and it's a good debate. In some cases, it's much more useful to get a good one-pager. Good one-pager with good information that will just make it much easier for me to go through all the data. So, yes, as I said, I'm a fan of civil society, and I continue working with civil society, and I'm looking forward to this discussion, but maybe I'm not a typical member of the European Parliament. Thank you.
Can I just have a follow-up?
One more thing, where civil society can also assist is educating and awareness raising. It is my second term in the European Parliament, and still I see that when we work on digital topics, on tech questions, there is not much appetite from the members of the Parliament. So when I said that I think it's important to cooperate with all the stakeholders, I still see that the track of Parliament is rather weak. IGF has introduced the parliamentary track. Starting from today, I'm chairing the European Internet Forum. We have a strong parliamentary track. But if you want to have good laws and good regulations, you need smart parliamentarians. So I also see the role of civil society in educating parliamentarians and politicians. Thank you.
So I have, since you were very short, thank you for that. I have two follow-up questions. One is, what can we do to engage better with conservative parties on this file? And the second question is, how can we motivate parliamentarians for educational type of activities? Easy questions.
I think the important thing is just cooperate, cooperate, cooperate. Knock on the doors, ask for meetings. If you can't reach the member of the parliament, and I know that the calendars are fully booked, talk to the advisors. Because in many cases, the advisors are much smarter on specific topics than the members of the parliament. So just gain friends, talk, explain, go again, send invitations, send one-pagers, and in the end, I think there will be a good result. The same with conservative parties. Now, my background is in government. As I said, I was in foreign service, so I'm always telling in foreign policy, it's so easy for Georgians or Ukrainians to come to Estonia, but go where it's much more difficult. So sometimes do not spend so much time on your friends or on those who have the same position, or make alliances with those who have the same position, and then go to the conservatives. I was using very much the information I was receiving also from EDRi when we had tough discussions during the terrorist content online negotiations, and it was useful. So we can also put our efforts together. And the second question was?
How can we motivate MEPs? You said they need to be educated more.
Educated.
So how do we motivate them to actually participate in these types of educational exchanges?
I do not have an answer. But I know that, for example, the European Internet Forum that will have today their opening reception, and I hope that can cooperate much more closely with the civil society, will have an educational program for the members of the parliament. How many will show up? Out of 700 plus, maybe 2, 3. So it just takes time. And perhaps maybe those people, members of the European Parliament, they need some personal encounter. If they have some personal encounter, either them or their colleagues or somebody else, then you start looking. As I said, 2007 was my personal encounter. From 2007, cyber is part of my life. I know that's going to be part of my life. I know that ICT revolution came to stay. But if somebody has not had that personal encounter yet, then perhaps through simple stories, but talking, approaching, and not being tired of doing that.
Which we sometimes are, right? Thank you for that. Turning to the Commission now, and Rita Wezenbeek. We know that Digital Services Act has been a priority for many years, both for the Commission and civil society. We're now in the enforcement and implementation stage. But could you reflect maybe back on how civil society has been involved so far in the process? What has been maybe most useful, most valuable for the input? And how do you see spaces for improvement of that engagement now in the enforcement phase?
So first of all, thank you very much, and big compliments for your great event. Also, great opportunity for us to meet everybody here who plays a role also in DSA enforcement. So indeed, I can go back up to the moment that I started, but since then, and especially in the enforcement and also consultation activities, the civil society has played an enormous role. So I think if we are also in the DSA a fan of civil society, because you know probably I come from the antitrust enforcement area. There normally you have a series of companies who are victims of certain behavior, who can complain, who bring you the file, and then you can go. Now, if we are doing this enforcement action for the interest of society, we need society also to speak. And this is basically what you do. And so, I mean, I can go through the enforcement history of the last year, because we are now basically in action for the last year. And then you can see that civil society plays a role everywhere. Like, for instance, there is the BEUC complaint against Temu that we are actively investigating together with Commission Amman, the Irish counterparts. And that is very helpful because it brings us facts. We had a complaint by EDRi, which was also public, against the fact that LinkedIn seemed to be allowing targeted advertising on the basis of sensitive information. This happened to be because advertising to LinkedIn groups was allowed. And so on that basis, we had a dialogue with LinkedIn, and they changed the practice. So a very effective action. Then, with respect to Meta, we are still in an investigation to investigate disinformation through advertising, also, what do you call it, shadow banning. But in this information, and a report on Russian disinformation networks is playing an important role. So we see there that the role of civil society is enormous. Maybe a last example, because then I don't monopolize the floor. But if you look at TikTok Lite, this was an important action over the past year. So we have a case open against TikTok, which is a general case that looks at protection of minors, addictiveness, rabbit holes, etc. But in April, TikTok informed us that they were in the process of rolling out a new app, which was in particular to save use of data, but that had a lot of addictive elements. So adults, but also children who could use the app, would collect points if they would spend more time on screen, or they would follow certain influencers, and with those points they could gain vouchers for PayPal. So we said, if you really earn, well, what is similar to money, this is highly addictive. We told them they had to hand in a risk assessment. I mean, there was a bit of discussion on that. And then we said we're ready to adopt interim measures. And so 16 weeks later, first of all, TikTok voluntarily paused the rollout, and 16 weeks later, they stopped. Now, for all of you who are interested, you can see that last week, the commitments decision in which TikTok committed to stop the rollout over the whole of Europe was published. And you will see that in that commitment decision, our analysis is to a large extent based on reports by CSOs and by academics. So this demonstrates how important the role is of representatives of society in this sense. So I'll stop here.
Thank you so much for these examples, and these are all very useful and interesting. I just have maybe two follow-up questions, because we still have a little bit of time from your slot. Given that many of the measures from the DSA implementation are voluntary and not fully transparent, how can actually we ensure that civil society can have information to be able to then engage? Because these are all examples that, you know, somebody needs to have an information on what is happening, or what has been findings, for example, from the risk assessment, in order to actually understand what could be concerns, and then maybe launch a complaint or ask for additional questions and explanations.
So I think that the main component of the answer is that we are having regular dialogues with the civil society organization in the form of roundtables, where we discuss a bit our agenda, our priorities. So this is a moment to influence. And now I was thinking something else. So you said, yes, how do we know what is
well, transparency is an issue in this situation, as you know.
Yeah, this will always be an issue if you are in an enforcement mode. So, I mean, it's like if you're inadvertently being prosecuted for whichever offense you may have done, you don't want this to be known to the outside world. Also, it can be very harmful. So, in that sense, it's difficult. But, I mean, our priorities can be known. You also, if I can be very practical, we have the Digital Services Board with whom we work together. They publish a work program, so you can see a bit what are our intentions. But then I'm speaking more about the legislative acts or the implementing acts and the regulatory acts that we are preparing. And there definitely you can influence, like this and also other issues. This week there will be a workshop on protection of minors, where also we are carefully listening to civil society representatives on what should be done. And this is to prepare the guidance for protection of minors under Article 28 of the DSA. For the connoisseurs, this is about having a website or having the design of the interface of the platforms if they are used by children in a secure and safe and appropriate way for children. This leads to guidelines. Another way, and then I'll stop, was the work that was done on elections, where civil society was also carefully consulted and involved. There we even had a kind of stress test where we called in the platforms, we called in civil society, and there were a number of case studies done so that the platforms were confronted with the reactions of the experts from the NGOs and civil society organizations on how to deal with certain elements of disinformation or unlawful content.
And did it lead to them changing some of the practices?
Yes, definitely. I mean, and you can still ask this concept is now also being used for further elections in the EU. We have a group of officials who, on the basis of this experience, have targeted meetings in member states where there will be elections, and the feedback that we get also from those similar stress tests but then on a national basis is very good.
Thank you so much for sharing such rich information with us. We will now turn to civil society perspective. Asha Ellen, you were one of the key voices in both the legislation initiative and implementation and also coordination of civil society on this topic. And from your perspective, what has worked well and where there is room for, obviously, improvement?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see so many friendly faces, familiar faces and new. So yes, I would start off first by also commending what was mentioned in terms of the European Commission's engagement with civil society. This is now my third mandate here in Brussels, and it's been improving every time. So that's been good. During the development of the DSA from the legislative perspective, there was a lot of consultation. We did have increased access to the European Commission in difference to, previous files that I've worked on, and we're pleased to see that there is a level of baseline consistency in continuing to engage with civil society, as you mentioned with the roundtables, but the European Commission's participation in the spaces that we establish. So many of the organizations here also participate in the DSA Civil Society Coordination Group that we established a couple of years ago, and we're very pleased with how much you've been engaging on this. But as you mentioned, there's always room for improvement. And I think at the base of this is remembering what the role of civil society is and what power dynamics we're discussing here, right? Because we're talking about this in an enforcement context right now.
Yes.
You as the enforcement body, you're enforcing, in this case, very large online platforms, very big, powerful companies, and you need our expertise to be able to inform your work. But we, in that power dynamic, are the least resourced, the least funded, the ones who have dedicated, actually many of us, our entire careers to these very specific issues that the DSA tries to tackle. And I think remembering that the DSA actually tackles quite a lot of normative issues in which certain elements of it still is not defined, despite the fact we have the legislation. We're still talking about what is a systemic risk. How do you identify that as a systemic risk? And for those of us who've been working on this for, CDT's been going for 30 years now, many organizations have been going for a long time, our expertise is going to be essential in actually understanding some of the impacts where you may then have to take enforcement decisions. So I think it's about the equity of partnership when it comes to understanding how civil society are to participate. Now, in terms of what has worked, you mentioned the roundtables. This has been useful to know that we can have this on a regular basis. I think there's, of course, room for improvements in how that's developed, maybe around the agenda setting, where things can be specific. The DSA is enormous. It's a big regulation, right? So having one roundtable focused on specific issues can be useful, but often there's not the space to go into the level of detail that actually would be useful for you. So that's one thing here. But also the issues here are not cut and dry. You're going to need expertise from different breadths of civil society to inform those decisions in the most concrete way. But I did want to come back to the kind of transparency question, because the DSA also very clearly establishes those rules on illegal content and things like this. But where you may be limited, say, for confidentiality questions or enforcement, the DSA also requires a level of transparency, especially from very large online platforms, which I think we can be honest, they are not living up to that promise, as we've seen already. It's voluntary. We've been dealing with them in the due diligence space for many years at this point. And if we're not going to use the force of the DSA to force them to increase that transparency when it comes to these different aspects, then we need to think about how to push that even further. But in terms of what's worked so far, I've mentioned there the the roundtables, but I think in terms of where we could potentially improve, we need to look at the opportunities at the different mechanisms that you're establishing. So the roundtables have worked in a very kind of informal and ad hoc way, but you also mentioned the board, which is this brand new entity, and I think that having a kind of this third entity, an advisory body within this that's made up of civil society will be helpful to the actions that the board will then take. The board has a lot of power, for those of you who know the DSA well, and being able to inform those decisions will be best placed if there's a very structured way and a more formal way for us to be able to engage. And this also allows us to kind of work in the dual way that civil society is supposed to operate. So not only are we there to provide you with our expertise, but we're also accountability actors too. So that means our relationship is nuanced and complex, but we need to embrace that nuance and complex because it makes each other's work even more useful and reiterates the purpose of why we're engaging with each other, and that is to respect and protect the fundamental rights of everybody that the legislation touches upon. I know we're talking about the DSA here, but the AI Act also provides us with another example, right? So now we're developing secondary legislation, and there was an opportunity to consult widely with civil society on, say, the guidelines on prohibitions. But I think a recent example of where it was a good moment, but then it could have been improved, was that a breadth of civil society were requested to participate, but I think then the participation of some CSOs without the specific very technical expertise, but had more of this kind of research background or different backgrounds, their participation was conditional on having some kind of representation capacity, and this happened during the height of summer. Mm-hmm. So this was, there are moments where I think there can be improvements or thinking about how civil society can engage. I know it's difficult.
I mean, we don't like to work in the height of summer either.
Yes,
but we do.
But in terms of that goes back to the capacity question again, right? Because I think many of us are in the same situation, but at CDT, it is, for those of us working on online expression, for the last couple of years, it's been me and my brilliant colleague David over here. It's been the two of us, right? And we're covering the entirety of the DSA. Okay. So this is where that capacity question comes in. But just to wrap up very quickly, I think it's very important to remember what the role of civil society is. We have this duality, we have this complexity. We also have the expertise that's necessary. Often you'll find that people who are working in the enforcement space now maybe are new to some of these issues, where we've been thinking about these issues in a very, very long time. Also remember that there is a duty under the Treaty of the European Union, Article 11, to regularly consult civil society. It's a duty of all the EU institutions to uphold this. We have existing examples. I previously, in previous hats, used to sit in the advisory body on equality between women and men. There are existing bodies we can look to. There's ones for different policies that we can look to draw to say, okay, how do we create a formal structure for CSOs to engage on DSA implementation? And the last thing I'd say is best practice is always evolving. And it will need to evolve in the context of the DSA because it's so complex. And some of the issues that we're talking about now are going to be very different perhaps in 5 years' time. So I will stop there because I've been talking for a while already. But those are the key points, I would say, in terms of feedback.
Thank you, and thank you for mentioning both the duality of the role of civil society and reiterating the treaty obligation. Maybe on that last one, just a quick follow-up. We know that the mission letter for the Commissioner McGrath includes establishing civil society platform. Any expectations from that?
I think we should always have good expectations when something is outlined in a mission letter, and understanding, I know this is under the Commissioner-elect McGrath, but I believe there's multiple references to CSO consultations across different Commissioner-elect portfolios, and so this has to be taken seriously. It cannot continue to be ad hoc or in this kind of very compact way in which it's, I think we use the term tick box exercise quite often, and I don't want to say it in the context as much as the DSA because it has been so, much more consistent and substantial, but it really is what you'll find. And during the DSA negotiation, maybe just one anecdote here, when the negotiation was in the midst during the trilogues, we all love trilogues, super fun trilogues. But during that, fundamental questions started to emerge around what happens when you have a conflict situation because of the timing of the DSA, and what happens when you start to have this information appear on social media platforms. And you could tell that the negotiators were really trying to figure this out, and it's like, we've been working on this for, 10, 15 years or so. So maybe if there's a more concrete way where we're doing legislative formation in a more open and democratic way, we can go on a long conversation about trilogues and how things develop. But yes, if we can kind of have that space, I think that would be slightly more concrete. So I think we have to, again, as accountability actors, uphold that commitment that's in this mandate and demand that it really comes to fruition, and that we have a role in establishing how that operates. We do not,
also. Yeah.
precisely, we do not want to be invited to the party. We're also the hosts too.
Exactly. Thank you for that. And since we mentioned the AI Act, I'm going to come back to the Commission. Irina, it's gaining speed, right? The implementation for the AI Act. We chatted about it a little bit before. So maybe in the next 2 years, we will have opportunities for civil society to engage, first of all, formally through the advisory board, where we do expect civil society to have a certain role. And maybe question for you, how do you envisage that role, considering the duty to uphold civic dialogue, but also the dual role of civil society? And maybe what would be the AI office additional efforts to try to engage with civil society, learning from the DSA implementation? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and hello everybody. So the AI Act entered into force on 1st of August. So it's a very young child, and it does not mean that it is already applicable, but there will be different dates for the applicability of rules. Now, let me start with a bit of history, and then I'll go into the future cooperation. The process of the AI Act started, well, not of the AI Act, but of the Commission asking itself questions on ethics of artificial intelligence. Started 6 years ago in 2018 with the first strategy on AI for Europe. And on that basis, the question was asked, okay, what kind of rules do we need? Do we need rules? So there was a call for a high-level expert group, because the Commission found also that it's very, very good to have external expertise on that kind of question. Now, on that call, 2018, the topic only started to be so much fashionable. We had more than 500 applications, so we put together a pretty large group of, I think, 52 experts, and there already we had a number from civil society, including, for example, BEUC. Now, this high-level expert group came with guidelines on trustworthy AI, and they're putting together also principles for trustworthy AI. And many of these principles, actually most of them, were then translated into the AI Act. So you could see that already here we had the formal involvement of civil society. And also when getting there, we have all the public consultations where we got very interesting contributions from civil society and actually very helpful contributions. We also were with many of you in a permanent dialogue, be it because we have this kind of event and we chat in the coffee break, be it because there were official roundtables or meetings or whatever. And there were plenty of questions and there were plenty of answers. The AI Act is taking a risk-based approach, which means it does regulate use cases where there is a particular risk to fundamental rights. And on these use cases, indeed, to really see what is happening in the member states, how is it being used, also in the field of law enforcement and other topics which are perhaps not so much in everyday's newspaper, we had very, very important input. And really also input that helped us shaping the AI Act. And I see Laura, who was working with the lead rapporteur, and I know that they are also was a lot of input from civil society, and all this found its way into the AI Act, which indeed at the end is always a balancing act also between different interests, but that we all know. Now for the future, we have like two main strands, I would say. The one is, I said before, that the rules will enter into force different dates. So we start with the prohibitions, and indeed on the prohibitions, like biometric identification, predictive policing, social scoring. So I would say that this is also at the core of your interests, the manipulative practices prohibited. And here we have, the rules will be applicable from 2nd of February, and indeed, we will need to publish guidance. Guidance explaining what exactly do the prohibitions in their wording imply, and what are the use cases again. And there we will have a public consultation, and like we will have a first draft, and that will be with a targeted consultation during 4 weeks. And we really want your input.
Which month? October, November?
The $100 million question.
Pin down.
Well before February.
Okay.
No, but since we are currently changing commission and with all the hearings and everything, actually the timeline is not really. It will be confirmed.
Can I just ask not to do it over Christmas break? Thank you. It happens.
I hope it's not going to be over Christmas break, also because we need to adopt them before February. So my fear is actually that you will be consulted before Christmas break, and my Christmas break will be inexistent to read all your contributions, which means that we would like to consult it at an earlier stage. But this is really something nobody knows at this point when it is going to happen, but it is going to happen, and I promise that I want to save all our Christmas breaks. But there it will be key to have input. It will be key to get use cases. It will be key also to get use cases from member states that are not so clearly on our newspaper reading map, to say it like this. So here really we build on you. We build on your networks. We build on your knowledge. This is very, very important. And this will be also important then for the high-risk use cases. That will be applicable from August 26. There also we will publish guidance. So also there, indeed, we will need your input. And you can also send us the input already now, because then it will go into our thinking, into the guidance documents. So if you feel that there is something where it is unclear, where you feel you know a case, let us know anytime. So this is like the type of dialogue where we very much like your input, where you will be consulted, but where indeed you can also send us input without being consulted. Now you were mentioning the advisory forum. So just in terms of structure, the advisory forum will be advising the Commission, the member states, the AI board on all aspects related to the implementation of the AI Act, also with regard to the future of the AI Act. And there the AI Act says that it should consist half of members that have non-commercial interest. So I think there will be quite a role for civil society, because to put together an important forum where all the relevant stakeholders are represented, and to have half of the members that don't have a commercial interest, it clearly gives a role to civil society, to academia. And there, all kinds of different aspects of the AI Act will be consulted. So this will be a very, very important formal forum to do this. We will need to have it established by August next year. We are currently still discussing how to do it. There are some thoughts, and this brings me to another point. You will know that we have the AI Alliance, which is an internet-based forum where like everybody can discuss AI, and where there were also in the past meetings. And the interesting thing about it was always that you have like citizens, you have individuals, you have organized civil society, you have unorganized and organized people getting together. And the nice thing I found about it is that some of the discussions were really surprising. Because you got additional elements, also from the fact that we have represented people to whom we do not talk every day. And this AI Alliance will play the one or the other role, be it linked to the advisory forum, be it linked also in general to discussions and providing input. But this is something where we still have a bit of time, so we will launch it in due time. Thank you.
Thank you for providing us with a palette of different options for participation. Maybe just one follow-up question, because you mentioned also a mix of structured and systemic options and avenues for participation, but also more informal. If somebody wants to send an input for guidance on prohibitions, how do they do it now without the official open call? If I may put you on the spot to give us an in.
Send me an email.
Okay,
First
you
name,
heard it.
point, second name. No, but indeed we have also an email address for the AI office. And if you look into the internet for the AI Act and the AI office, you will find possibilities of contact. And otherwise, ask the organizers. They have
Sure.
our email addresses.
We can share with your permission. This is super relevant for organizations, especially outside of Brussels, because we know they face many difficulties in actually being present in all of these discussions. So we turn to Kasia now, maybe to give us a perspective outside of the bubble. How was your experience in participating in legislative and contributing to legislative process of the DSA and AI Act and consequent implementations? And what are some of the improvements you would like to see, hearing all of these options laid out on the table? Thank you.
Thank you so much for saving the chair for non-Brussels-based organization. Panopticon has been in the game for 15 years, so already like 3 terms, and I do see the improvement, plus one to what Asha eloquently said. But we are not conveners, we are not professional advocates, we are not coming here more than maybe once a quarter. It's a big deal for us to be part of the Brussels bubble, but we do see our role in it, and we think, and Renata, you said it, you want to hear the society speak, and we are probably your best proxy for the real society. Yeah. So in our day job, we talk to real people in Poland, which is not a small country, but also not a central country. In Europe, it can be influential in elections, it can be influential in many policy debates. Polish presidency will be fully operational next year, and they need priorities, and they are completely lost because they're also sort of disconnected. So Poland as the country, Polish government, Polish civil society needs bridges to Brussels to be relevant in these debates, and we do find it difficult. So where we see our strength is in providing specific expertise on things we are able to research, document, bring as evidence to the Commission. We have done that job throughout the first 2 years for us of DSA, slowly coming into force. We provided evidence, for example, on Meta not fixing what we call a negative feedback button. Sounds silly, like a small function, but it's really a big deal. So people who want to change the feed they are seeing on their screens, they actually have no way to do that using the function that is provided by the platform. So one would think, if I can click, don't show me that, this is exactly what will happen. If I have a mental health issue, if I have a trauma, if I have any other really sensitivity that I'm not even keen to reveal, but I'm aware of that and I want to protect myself, which is systemic risk, could be a systemic risk, I should have a simple measure to deal with that. The platform provides that measure, but this is not functioning. This is actually ill-designed or maybe even fake button just to keep people engaged, keep people providing signals Meta likes to collect, like, show me your engagement approach, but not really mitigating any risk. So we did a case study on that. We did a series of briefs for DG Connect on how to understand root causes of harms that we observe in recommender systems. We were able to convene a large group of experts working deep technically on recommender systems and provided examples of questions that Commission might want to ask to platforms to dig deep in root causes of observed harms. And we hear in a number of calls we were able to have with Commission experts, which was really, really great. We've heard appreciation for this. We've heard that the expertise we provided was useful. But this is still inside of the Brussels black box. When I go back to my constituency, so to say, to people who trust us, who give us donations, who follow us online, to funders, what can I really tell them? That I spent 6 months of my life providing briefs to the Commission, having trust that it will be useful, but not really getting anything tangible that I can also show to people who support us. So one of the things I want to signal is the need for not like, thank you, not appreciation, but feedback and understanding of whether and how our work has been useful. Because if it has been useful, then we get motivated and we get good reason to continue exactly that work. So, for example, we would love to be, heard on specific cases. We would love to provide written comments, and we know there is legal basis for that. Yes, in Article 51, in Article 67 of the DSA, we are waiting for that. But if you take us by surprise by sending us a letter like a month in advance, we probably might not be able to provide that timely, because we also need time to gather evidence. And there are limitations, obviously, to what we can do in evidence gathering. Meta, when we published that case study, obviously responded, oh, it's just one person, right? And we said, yes, that's one case. We believe it's representative for the problem, but that's exactly the way we can provide evidence. We see smoke coming from the roof. We can document that smoke. We can describe it. We can go deeper in creating a hypothesis about the causes of the smoke, but we cannot go at scale. We cannot dive deeper into Meta own ecosystem to check how they design it. This is the role for the Commissioner. This is the role for other authorities who can do proper investigations. We would love to be part of that, but we don't want to take blame for not being able to provide statistical data on how Meta treats their users. They see it all. So another example of what would be incredibly useful for us is having some access to redacted risk assessments, or any other form of accessing the knowledge that we believe the Commission must have gained through the previous year of receiving documents from platforms. We understand you cannot show it all. We understand there is confidentiality to that. But if I hear from DG Connect team that the questions we suggest that they ask have been useful, it's great news. But how can we learn the results of these questions? If we have any way of learning about the inner workings of these large platforms through the responses you get, we would be much more efficient in that dialogue. We could really upgrade our input in the process as well. So this is like a spiral movement in which we really hope to go up and be able to be more and more relevant with how we collect evidence, how we provide advice and expertise. But most of us outside Brussels are small shops specialized in something, having access to real people, having access to real media, to real politicians on national level, which is value. But we don't have capacity for long-term research like academia does. We don't have capacity for coming here every week to listen about the new gossips from Brussels, what's coming up. So all open calls for evidence, calls for technical assistance, asking us to provide something in writing, being proactive in this relationship with us helps a lot. It's motivation, and it's also a frame in which we can really make ourselves useful.
And maybe to follow up, what would be the useful format to get that feedback from the institutions for organizations like yours?
I mean, once we are in touch with the institution, we usually know who to talk to. So with this example of negative feedback button and the DSA enforcement team, we'll already know who is on that. We know these people, but I will not be sending them emails every week because I'm protecting their inbox and myself, and I'm respectful of their time. So I think it's really a matter of more like transparency, being proactive on the side of the institution rather than a method. It can be really any method. I can take signal message, I can take email, I can take open call for evidence. All that works for me as long as I don't need to spam the inbox of EU official to get that information and create burden on my side to do the guessing.
Thank you so much. And maybe hearing now from BEUC, really a household name here in Brussels, Alexander, will tell us something more from the perspective of consumer rights and redress. Based on your experience, what can civil society bring to the enforcement part of digital policies, and how to really work alongside institutions?
Since I'm the last one, I will repeat some of the things that have been said before. Apologies. We have a good experience of collaborating with enforcers and with authorities at BEUC, and very importantly, we try to do that at the EU level with the European Commission, but also at national level. So we try to make sure that our members at national level develop good relationship with their authorities. Maybe one word about the content. I will focus on enforcement, so not on policy making. And the context is a bit peculiar when it comes to enforcement. There are things that do not change and things that change. Things that do not change, the high political pressure, the huge asymmetries of powers with big tech companies when they bring hundreds of lawyers on the table. They have access to evidence. We don't sometimes. So we have issues, accessing evidence to show that there is something ongoing. What are the things that change? It's a different environment, and Rita, you said in the previous talk, it's a rule-based environment. So there are rules that you have to follow. There are confidentiality rules. You have due process considerations. And these rules are important. So this being said, I just wanted to there is no magic recipe for this good collaboration with authorities. I just wanted to tell you the ingredients that we use at BEUC to manage something, to try to get something. And the first ingredient, which is very important in our view, is to have a good dose of open-mindedness and willingness to work together. Meaning you can have an obligation to consult the CSOs. If you don't have people who are keen and willing to learn from the other one, you won't go very far. You have to have the right mindset, saying, okay, I'm here, we're here to work together, so I know where I come from, but okay, let's try to have a common agenda. That's the first thing. You can have clashes, and we have as often clashes with authorities or with regulators, and okay, this is fine. This is fine, and it's good to have another perspective on issues. Second is you need mutual trust. And here we take this for granted at the EU level, and we have very good collaboration with the Commission, and it's great. We value this a lot. But when it comes to national level, it's clear that we have civil society organizations that are still struggling, because authorities, they consider it as competitors or as troublemakers, or CSOs also do not consider their regulators because they don't trust them. This takes time. It takes time to build trust. So you need trust. You need to build mutual trust. You need to be realistic about your expectations. What can CSOs bring to authorities? Access to data, field data, evidence, contact with the ground, analysis of market systemic trends, bring another perspective on topics, maybe less politically tainted, a bit free from political considerations sometimes. They can be also intermediary between the field and the regulators. They can have this educational angle also, which can be very important. So be realistic about your expectations. We should also be realistic vis-à-vis what authorities can do, what they can offer, considering also their own constraints. Continuous exchanges are, in our view, better than sporadic discussions. I'll give you a concrete example. So we are developing our collaboration with authorities, and we have a quarterly newsletter that we initially started with our membership, so just for our members. And then after a while, we saw, this actually could be very interesting for authorities as well. So we decided to share it with authorities to explain what are our members doing from an enforcement perspective at national level, what is BEUC doing at national level, and we are sharing it with consumer authorities, we are sharing it with DPAs, with some DPAs, or those who accept. And it's interesting because they know what you are doing, what is on your plate. So it's good to have this discussion. Sometimes you should not expect any responses to this newsletter, but just it might ring a bell. Okay, BEUC, they are working on this. We should maybe touch base with them. Fifth, and it's also based on our experience, start small with a clearly defined project instead of going for guidelines or whatever. Start with a small project, build trust with a clear objectives. And to give you an example, we started small with the CPC network, which is the network of consumer protection authorities, and now we have an MOU with the CPC authorities, because step by step after the years they realize, okay, they can bring this to the equation. So we have an MOU, and to give you an example, as part of the MOU, we have at least the commitments from authorities to consult us on the feedback or the commitments that could be proposed by traders. We have annual meetings on enforcement priorities to know more about what they are doing or what are their plans for the year to come. We have a suggestion to organize joint webinars on topics of common interest. So when we see topics where there is a common interest between authorities and us or our members, we meet and then we propose, our perspective, and we hear their perspective and we discuss. So, organize this forum for exchanges. We have contact persons, so when we have a complaint, we make sure to put a face on the complaint so that it's not only the organization, but there is a face, there is a person in charge. And here, if you want to invest in cooperation, I really believe to invest in people instead of organization. It's really building trust with people, first of all. And many downs before less ups, unfortunately. But don't give up with when you face the first obstacles, because it's a long road. It's a learning process, I think, for authorities as well and for CSOs. So don't give up and don't be discouraged by the first clashes. Yeah, thank you.
That's a very difficult task. I do have follow-up questions, but I want to open the floor. I see also people have been taking notes and raising hands already. Maybe first few questions who has for our MEP, Marina Kaljunen, because she might need to leave soon. So if there's any questions for MEP, please. Or general questions, then we can go. Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you. Luca Bertuzzi, MLEX. 2 questions for the Commissioner, if you will allow me. Irina, you mentioned the guidelines on Article 5 and on Article 6. What is happening with the guidelines for the AI definition? Before the summer, the Commission was putting them together with the ones for Article 5, but at the AI board meeting on September 10th, the Article 5 guidelines were mentioned, but not the ones on the definition. Is the Commission still thinking to deliver them by 2nd of February? Second one, sorry. For Rita, we saw in the mission letter for Virkunen that cyberbullying, addictive design are big priorities. In general, online child protection is a big priority for this Commission. How much of that will be covered under the DSA, and how much can we expect will be picked up in the Digital Fairness Act? I understand you might be tempted to say the DSA is great, we don't need anything else, but we saw there is appetite in the Parliament to have addictive design, for instance, covered in the Digital Fairness Act, and that it's a matter of consumer law, plus there are certain limits to the DSA. It only covers platform, it doesn't cover stuff like video games, which the Council is looking at from a consumer perspective as well. So what's your take on that? Thank you.
And if I may add, if you both can add, how can civil society participate in those efforts?
Okay, I start, it's quick. Yes, we will also have guidance on the definition. Yes, it's also going to be publicly consulted, which means that you all can have your say officially. And the same I said before, because of the fact that we are going to have a new commission, we are not certain about the timeline, but we know that everything will be in place for 2nd of February. Thank you.
Indeed, mission letter and the sort of separate topics. So we are in the process of getting to know our commissioner designate, and this is an exciting period. It will be for her, of course, to decide on political priorities and how to organize the work. I mean, we can go whichever way. It is true that the DSA is an overarching legislation and basically covers or provides a framework for due diligence compliance of all the platforms. And also a priority of Mrs. von der Leyen is also, as explained in the mission letters, we now move to effective enforcement. So this is what our focus is. This is not to say that there's no room for any kind of new initiative, but ideally, if you ask me, you know, from the perspective of DSA enforcement, apologies, that needs to be done in a smart way. So there's always room. Like the DSA fundamentally is a law that creates, you know, accountability, responsibility of platforms for keeping their house in order, and it has mainly procedural rules. So they need to act as a good housekeeper, as a good market master, or as a good town square master. But that is not to say that there cannot be specific prohibitions. I mean, prohibitions and the definition of what is unlawful is normally for other legislation. So this is something that could very well fit into the DSA. But we leave it to our political masters how to shape that. I'm sorry. I have a lot to say also about funding and you know, the predictability, transparency, etc. But I don't want to monopolize the floor, so you call the shots. But there are answers there. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sophia. I'm Business Human Rights Advocacy Officer, Frontline Defenders. My question is about civil society engagement more broadly, because we've been discussing here, and many of the panelists mentioned this. We've seen improvements, but my question is, how do we ensure that civil society from beyond the EU, because even though we are discussing EU policies and EU legislations and directives, we have to keep in mind that a lot of the things that are discussed here have impacts elsewhere. Like we are, EU is exporting and producing technology that ends up all globally, all over the world. So how do we ensure, and this goes to all of the panelists, how do we ensure that those civil societies that are not based in the EU can also participate, like also from the side of policymakers, but also from civil society side? How do we open that space to ensure that those voices are also heard?
And maybe concretely for our MEP, is there space for parliamentarians to open the more engagement pathways for civil society outside of the EU, considering how much the policies and the work of EU itself impacts them as well?
Do you want me to start? Yeah. I was listening to the question, and I went through the history of my meetings with civil society. When I was first elected, 2019, my principle was to meet almost everybody who wanted to meet me. So in 3 months, I had about 100 meetings with civil society, with academia, but also other stakeholders. And if I look back into that, there were none. Yes, there were politicians. There were my colleagues from other parliaments. But on tech topics, I did not talk to civil society from outside the EU. Yes, I was talking with civil society outside the EU on political topics, foreign policy, other topics, but not on tech. So I'm rather confused. I don't know if somebody wants to share experience or somebody wants to add their position, happy to listen. But yes, so far I see much more contacts with politicians. Whenever we are drafting or developing, we see very strong interest of politicians from not all the countries, but I don't know, United States. Whenever you discuss tech, you run into Senate, you run into members of Congress, and you consult with them, and we have regular meetings with them. On a yearly basis, annually, we go to Washington, D.C., they come here, so we exchange much more information on the political level.
Alexandra and Asha, you wanted to come in on this?
Maybe an answer to this question also, but just kind of generally, structure. This is something that I think is going to address many of these questions. So, first of all, to your colleagues in the European Parliament, they have a structure for monitoring DSA enforcement, and the European Parliament is the only democratically elected institution in the EU, and civil society have not been given access. We asked, they said no. To allowing us to participate in, or at least understand what was happening in terms of monitoring DSA implementation. So I think it's not always easy. As you mentioned, you said that you are not maybe a typical MEP. We would love MEPs like yourself to advocate for us to be in those spaces also, because it's challenging if we're not provided entry into those spaces. When it comes to structure, to avoid overwhelm for you, for the European Commission, for the team that you have in the enforcement team, I know you have dedicated people for civil society engagement to prevent their overwhelm, to prevent our overwhelm, because as Kasia was brilliantly mentioning there, it's difficult for us to know where to place our resources if we don't know precisely what's going to be useful for you, so we want to prevent our own overwhelm as well. So to prevent the need for the 300 emails that you were mentioning, or the multiple meetings, a structure would be the most useful thing. A formal structure where you know you're going to be engaging with a breadth of civil society. There are rules of procedure, there are memorandums of understandings, there's ways in which we can engage with each other. We might even be able to address some of the questions around increasing levels of transparency and access to information in a way that's respectful of the confines that you may be operating in. Because opaque transparency just equals diminished due diligence. It's useful to those who are being regulated where the transparency remains opaque in that context. So if there's a way for us to understand what are they telling you that they are doing, and we can say to you, well, they've said that before and it hasn't worked, right? And so if there's a structure, it's helpful for us who are kind of limited in our resources, but at the same time, it's helpful for you then to be able to ask us the very specific questions. And just very quickly, I mentioned the advisory body that I used to sit on because it was a macro structure which had, say, sub-working groups. I'm not saying it was perfect. There were things that were very challenging about working in that body, but it meant that if the European Commission very specifically needed to ask a question about cyber violence, I led that report on cyber violence and they had the answers for a very specific thing. So there are structures you can pull from that exist, that you can, pull different parts from, but I think structure would also help then our colleagues in the European Parliament as well, who have a lot of different stakeholders that they have to engage with, and at least they know how they're operating, and then it helps us to be able to be more resource smart in terms of what we're working with.
Yeah. Now, maybe very quickly to respond to your question, a concrete example. In 2 or 3 weeks' time, we will have our annual meeting with consumer protection authorities. So basically, it's 80 people in the room, coming from all the consumer protection authorities in Europe, plus the European Commission, DG Just mainly, and our members also at national level. And we co-host the meeting, and we have the meeting, the point is to discuss the next enforcement priorities. And we have divided the group into 5 or 6 groups, per priority. One is on digital, one on sustainability, and so on. And what we do is that we invite our members to present a project they have been working on to authorities or to the group, so that they can explain what they have been doing. And we did it in the past. It was very insightful because sometimes authorities and members from the same country say, well, we had no clue that you were working on this. So sometimes if you just organize, you create an opportunity to discuss, it may help. So then, after that first event, then they created the good relationship and you move on. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Lena. I'm from the Council on Tech and Social Cohesion and Search for Common Ground. I wanted to come back to what you were mentioning about the conversation with other MEPs, more on the right side. And the question I have is, are we perhaps also struggling to have civil society voices that are connected enough to other political perspectives, but yet who share a desire for a healthy online ecosystem? Is that perhaps one of the reasons why some of those MEPs are perhaps not paying attention or not showing up to be educated around these kinds of issues? And are there issues around polarization or other kinds of mis and disinformation that maybe we're not tapping into enough as civil society to be able to have the ear of those more right-leaning politicians? Thanks.
And we'll take another one so that you can think about the answer.
Yeah. Thanks for the panel. Sarah Brandstetter, I'm from MLEX 2, and I would like to follow up on this workshop on protection of minors, for example. I'm interested in what's the process here. How do you choose the civil society organizations that actually participate in these kind of groups? Maybe to ask to both sides, and do you think it works well?
MEP Calloran, please go ahead.
I do not have an answer to your question, but I think maybe digital topics and cyber topics, they still seem to be something out of this planet, and people do not feel comfortable. Everybody has opinion on climate, everybody has opinion on, economy, everybody has opinion on education, on medical care, but when you come to the topics of tech and digital and cyber, and you go more into the details and you become more specific, I think people just do not feel comfortable. So that's why it's raising awareness, and I really liked very much what Alexander said. No, do not lose your patience, and do not be too pessimistic about the setbacks, because there will be setbacks. How to choose with whom to talk? As I said, I had about 100 meetings, yeah? And after that, I had a pretty good picture who is who in the Brussels bubble and beyond the Brussels bubble. So I take it very personally. Those who really had something to say, which was worth listening to. And of course, there is a group that's having the meeting just for the tick, to report. We had a meeting with that MEP, we had a meeting with that MEP. So I think it's very much based on personal experience and personal contacts. And of course, it's very good to talk to umbrella organizations. So when I have a meeting, I always Google who is that going to be and who is that organization representing. And you talked about Poland and being, well, you're a huge country. But in the European Parliament, there are small delegations. From Estonia, we have altogether 7 MEPs, yeah? In the group of Social Democrats, there are 2 of us. So we have to be very careful with our time, with topics and everything. We can't cover everything. So please also take that into account. So yes, today I can say I'm picky. I know whom to trust. I know whom to cooperate with. And I think the pure fact that I'm here today shows whom I cooperate with.
Thank you. Can we go to the Commission for the second question? And maybe you can add what you had in mind previously about the...
Yes, thank you. So on the workshop, I must say that I don't exactly know what was the policy on this workshop. What certainly has been relevant is that there was a call for interest before, so we know a little bit, who takes the interest and who wants to express their views. The general rule is, of course, that we try to be as broad and as representative as possible, so that we get people from all angles of the spectrum and we listen to what their advice is. In this case, there are issues about, how do you deal with recommender systems? So how do you deal with addictive design? How do you deal with age verification? So there's also people who know these topics from a technical point of view. But, and definitely also people from the field, from schools, parent associations, teachers. So, but I'm going to have to check what is the specific policy for this workshop. On the broader questions, if I may, a number of them. The funding issue is, of course, important, and we have every interest that you stay in the game and that you also have a long breath. But this is, I must confess, it's not so easy to solve. what we see now in the, let's say, I don't want to picture the present and future as purely focused on enforcement, because enforcement also then captures the regulatory dialogue. So not everything leads or needs to lead to a confrontation with heavy fines. I mean, it's very much about how to bring about change, and it can also happen in a dialogue. But in this context, I mean, what we now do is we have a lot of support contracts where we have studies done or reports on what is the actual practice of the very large online platforms. Now, sometimes, and we haven't used that often yet, but you can have expert contracts which also allow that the experts, under confidentiality, have access to documents in our file. But the overarching situation or principle is that we live in this rule-based environment, which means that what the platforms are sending us is covered by strict confidentiality. And the rules for the risk assessment and the audits is that they are still confidential, and we will soon see the publication of a public version of the risk assessment of last year, plus the audit reports. So that should tell you a lot. I mean, we are urging, and we will further urge the platforms to not be overly active in taking information out. So these reports, although they are the public version, they can take out, of course, confidential information, but it should not be that you get a glossy brochure that is no reflection of what the internal report is. So that is really important. What we are also doing, but it's early days. I mean, we're only 1 year down the line. So we have the board of digital services coordinators, which is a key element also for our strategies and our consultation of the views from the member states. And recently, now in July, we have created 8 subgroups for specific topics like trusted flaggers, like protection of minors, like online marketplaces. And in principle, there's the possibility to invite experts. So, as I said, it's early days, but it's not excluded, and we can do that. And so this is, we are starting to work on that basis and see how it goes. So that's, let me see. Yes, and the point, of course, of the fact that we live in this rule-based environment means that we have to respect those due process rules. So we cannot share what is given to us under cover of confidentiality. And if we would do that, I mean, we live in the environment that you also see in competition enforcement, we risk annulment of a decision that comes out. So that you cannot compromise about that. One last thing, I really recognize your call also for recognition and visibility. That's not, I mean, I note that down and we take it away. We need to reflect also on how we move on, in particular with this regulatory dialogue. I mean, one thing to note is that sometimes the experts or the researchers that we are using are precisely asking for anonymity because they fear that there's a kind of retaliation, in particular in the area of social media. So we have to accommodate 2 things. So one part that wants to be visible and the other that wants not to be recognized. But I mean, these are questions that are very valid, and we need to reflect on them going forward, I would say.
We have time for a couple more questions.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Caroli. I used to work for the co-rapporteur of the AI Act, Mr. Benifei, as Irina mentioned. So having experience in dealing as an advisor in dealing with civil society, I would like to add to what Ms. Kaljuran was saying. The fact of not losing patience, as you were saying, Alexandra, but also keeping trying to engage. We must also, especially when it comes to conservative parties and groups, it must also be said that you must do it smartly. Like from my experience, I've seen that when some, let's say, ideological parts of the message are dropped, it's a bit easier to speak to certain MEPs who have a very different opinion than us, but maybe can share some elements that are very concrete, very pragmatic, and you can talk to them. Otherwise, it might actually become counterproductive to try and meet them, because they will just shut down. But there are examples of actually civil society being able to influence even conservative MEPs. In the AI Act, we've had quite some openness from conservative groups, and I have to say even Panopticon for us was a clear case of a very big influence towards a certain particular conservative group that was crucial for us in our negotiations. So thank you very much. And also, I wanted to add something to what Irina mentioned about the AI Act processes. You didn't mention the code of practice on GPAI models. I think it's a very interesting case of participation of civil society in the writing actually of the rules, because at first, since the text of the AI Act doesn't really say that civil society will be involved, but it's only a may, the Commission may involve civil society and other stakeholders. At the beginning, there was some concern that it wouldn't be open to civil society, this process, but in the end, I think what the Commission did with launching this platform, maybe with a little nudge from the Parliament, I like to think, and from civil society as well, the process that you launched, I think it could become really a success story, because there you see a very broad participation also from non-Brussels-based organizations, which is very useful for opening to a more diverse range of points of view, and clear, very structured involvement that could really become maybe even more codified in the future for other pieces of legislation. And thank you for flagging that the DSA working group of the Parliament is not open enough to civil society, now that there is also the one on AI. And my former boss is a co-chair. I think we can make sure that we learn the lesson on this, because I totally understand the point of having a structure, organizing, and also not being always the ones invited, maybe on ad hoc basis to contribute, because what you do is very important for us.
Thank you for these positive examples towards the end. We have one more question and quick answer, and then we can wrap up.
Hi, I'm Monique Steins. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm involved in various civil society organizations. Some of my issues may have been already addressed, but so I did some research in the Netherlands in various civil society organizations. So not talking about the digital rights organizations, not talking about the bits of freedom to privacy first, but on more civil society organizations within various domains, such as anti-racism, women organizations, and I find that. So the organizations, it was not that they thought it was scary because it was about technology. They thought it was scary, but it wasn't so that they didn't want to be involved. So if you talk to these various organizations, they might be a little bit scared in the first law, regulation, technology. But if you really give them the attention and explain what's happening with the people that they try to protect the rights from, then they are very, sorry, and they are very interested. But the problem is, and it was already touched upon, they would like to be involved, but they need some capacity in order to do that. And in order to need capacity, you do need some finance. So I was just wondering, what resources do you think these civil society organizations need to be able to speak out and have their voices heard? Where can they get it? And can you maybe do something to help? And then a second thing, and I'll be really quickly, is how can member states, but also roundtables, how can they be held accountable for not inviting critical civil society organizations when implementing, for example, these regulations? Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Thank you so much for these important questions. Shall we start with civil society? Yes.
Sure, I'll try and be super quick. My actual background started in migration and women's rights many years ago. I did not work in a digital rights organization. I worked in gender equality organizations and picked up on the issue of online gender-based violence through this. And you're 100% right. These organizations do not have the time and capacity to focus on these issues. It was just my sheer determination to get them to work on this. And the reality is twofold. We have a shrinking civic space in Europe where resourcing is just leaving the European continent and it's going to many different places, but we are all kind of fighting for the same resources. At the same time, though, there's been a high politicization of civil society organizations. We cannot detract from what has been happening in the political discourse in terms of the roles of civil society organizations and the work that we do. Because, as I mentioned before, our role is twofold. Not only are we there as experts, but we're there to hold not only, in this context, say, big tech accountable, but also government entities accountable too. And so that politicization has, I would say, worsened the kind of shrinking space and the more hostile environment that we've been experiencing over the last few years. Again, as you might be able to tell, I really like structure. So structure comes back into this again. Because if an organization who doesn't necessarily have the resource capacity to be contacting DG Connect while also contacting DG Justice, while also contacting DG Home about different issues, can have a forum where they say, okay, we know we are going to engage on this topic at this time in the year, so it gives us the opportunity to be able to engage, to say what's happening with hate speech for people from underrepresented minorities or racialized minorities, right? They know when they can engage in those specific topics. So it's about being smart about the resource allocation and how the different bodies engage with those different civil society organizations, but it's also about recognizing that they do have to engage with them in the first place. Quite interestingly, we now have the directive on violence against women in Europe. It was adopted this year. And out of the 7 provisions that criminalizes forms of violence, 4 of them are cyber violence criminalizations. Now, how much those women's rights organizations were invested in that directive but had no consultation on the DSA, which recognizes online gender-based violence as a systemic risk, is very interesting because those two things overlap with each other. The directive makes certain forms of online gender-based violence illegal content, but what happens to the other forms that are actually under due diligence obligations? They had no idea what was going on in the DSA conversation when they had full knowledge of what was going on in the directive. So it's also about that outreach, right? We are massive proponents of saying you need to speak to these other organizations too, because they have very specific and acute expertise that needs to come into this broader question of, say, content moderation or due diligence and tackling illegal content. So again, it's about being smart about it. The reality is money isn't going to just appear immediately as much as we would like it to. And also the confines that you have as the enforcement body also is the reality, right? We can't force you to go beyond those confines that you have. So it is about being smarter and structuring it in a way that makes it more accessible in recognition of, again, those power dynamics and the ability for us to engage.
Thank you, and Kasia, for a very brief answer, and then we will close.
Just adding to what Asha said, we have luck to have conveners like CDT and yourself, but it's even better when the two come together. So when the Commission creates a structure and civil society has a structure that correspond to each other, and then smaller entities, smaller NGOs outside of the digital rights field can plug themselves into for, as you, Asha, described, for a very specific job that we know is coming. So calls for evidence and moderating that space. Parliament can also do that from time to time. We've been through this, right? Like hearings on specific issues where people in the Parliament, people in the Commission, of course not people your level, but people you commission that job to, can do some research, can do outreach, can even contact umbrella organizations so that the invitation goes down to people who wouldn't be connected to Brussels-based debate on that issue otherwise. So that sort of curation of the field, it also needs to happen from within powerful institutions. And when it comes to money, we see from time to time that there is a tender, a call to apply for big grants for things called technical assistance. But just looking at this makes us, overwhelmed. Like for smaller NGO, if I talk to my finance director that there is opening in the EU, they don't even want to hear a second sentence. So maybe there is a way of making this look more human NGO friendly. Maybe there is an idea of how to, I don't know, re-grant or create smaller pots of money for non-expert organizations who will never apply for a proper tender, because as you know very well, for this you need a specific capacity, and then you end up having the usual suspects applying for tenders, and you know the circle is all locked, leaving outside smaller players who might provide the same expertise cheaper, more efficiently, and even maybe even, I don't know, deeper, because they are in a deeper connection with real people.
Thank you to our wonderful panelists for providing very concrete recommendations and summing up some of the discussions. Please, a round of applause for them. And thank you to you for staying during lunch break. So I won't keep you much longer from the lunch. We will sum up some of the recommendations and send them through to the institutions, and hope to see some improvements. Thank you once again for joining us. Enjoy your lunch.